He kept saying soon about our raise. One packet and retro sheet flipped the room, and forced back pay to January 1st across every store. Like and subscribe now, and don't miss the next unbelievable revenge story. Back in the early 2000s, I worked the counter in an Eastern Canadian telecom, just as corporate married us to a Western giant. December brought a glossy memo titled Compensation Adjustments that promised frontline reps up to $3.50 more, effective with area rollout in January. I photocopied that memo and taped it inside a red folder I labeled Raise, then circled the line that said area managers would administer it. Our area manager ran 7 or 8 stores, so I told myself January might bleed into February. February arrived like slush underfoot. I asked him about the raise, and he smiled the same word every time. Soon. I wrote the dates in a small notebook next to the word soon until the page looked like a tally of broken weather forecasts. The stakes were not abstract: rent, winter boots, and the quiet truth that a retroactive line item meant real money if someone unassigned it. On the wall, our store calendar carried 3 stickers: January, February, March, and I wrote raise at the top of each square as if the ink could call the date closer. Each shift, I slid the red folder back into my drawer beside a copy of the memo and a printed org chart with his name at the hinge. The folder got heavier, his answer got lighter. By March, I could hear a deeper hum behind the word soon, the kind that hides a scheme inside a smile. What exactly was he pocketing while we waited? The normal world of telecom retail is fluorescent hum, paper curls from receipt printers, and numbers that make or break lives by a hair. In that world, our manager's bonus rode on costs looking trim each quarter. A delay on raises makes a graph smile without making a human smile at all. I started testing my suspicion with phone calls. One quiet morning, I called 2 sister stores outside our area and asked a friendly rep what hit their pay lines. February, she said. Early February. A West Side manager said early March. I wrote both names and times on a yellow pad and slid the pad into the red folder behind the memo. Artifact by artifact, a picture sharpened. A calendar page with raise, scratched beside 4 dates. A phone note that said other areas paid. A tidbit from an older colleague who muttered that bonuses look fatter when the pay change lands late. At the counter, a customer asked if we had the patience to wait on hold with a carrier. I smiled and said patience is a choice, then looked at my folder and decided mine needed a clock. The word soon had begun to taste like copper on my tongue. I asked again in late March, again in April, again as May warmed the sidewalk outside the glass. Soon, he sang, a lullaby for adults. I stopped sleeping on it. I drafted a 4-page letter in clean, factual language that documented every ask, every date, every third party who confirmed they had already been paid. I printed 2 copies and slid them behind the memo. All I needed now was a moment that would turn soon into never again. Where would the leverage appear? It arrived because he liked to brag. On the Friday of the May-long weekend, he drifted in with cologne that smelled like a magazine and told 3 people in earshot that he would be at his Muskoka cottage by mid-afternoon. He laughed about beating traffic if he left at noon. I asked how long the drive was in my best apprentice voice, and he gave me the route and the arrival time as if they were weather. I wrote 3 lines on a scrap and pinned it to the corkboard beside my screen. Noon depart, 3 in the afternoon arrive, for PM send. I checked the directory for the president and the chief executive's direct emails I had copied into a draft the night before and placed them atop the letter inside the red folder. The letter's first page cited the compensation adjustments memo. The second listed dates and who said soon. The third named stores that had already received the raise. The fourth explained why a retroactive adjustment to January 1st would be the only fair repair. I slid a second artifact into the folder. A city map with a circle around the highway out to Muskoka, and a tiny dot where the cell tower's thin. He breezed out at noon, keys up like a host on television, and sent one last soon at my shoulder for old time's sake. I watched the door breathe shut and listened to the store reset around the absence his ego left. The clock reached 4 p.m. I opened my sent folder, attached the letter, set the subject to compensation rollout delay, area review requested, and press send. Would that little whoosh reach a desk big enough to make his weekend blink? Saturday, 7 in the morning. I opened with a broom and the slow heartbeat that follows a gamble. My plan had been simple: ruin his weekend with accountability and win the raise. The result arrived 5 minutes later in the shape of his car, wet from highway air. He strode in, scanned the floor, and said my name like a diagnosis. Outside, he said, already walking. In the parking lot, he worked an apology that tasted like aluminum. He had been misinformed about rollout timing, he said. He had been planning a review Monday, he said. Then the receipts came out of his mouth, as if someone else had placed them there. Everyone in the area would receive the raise, retroactive to January 1st, and our location would receive the maximum adjustment. The way he shaped the phrase maximum told me he had already been shaped by somebody above him. I pictured my email in a morning inbox with a subject line hard to ignore and a signature line that made even confident people sit up straight. I pulled out my own artifact, a print of my sent folder with 4 p.m. stamped next to the subject, and a copy of the phone notes listing the other store's dates. He looked anywhere but at the paper. He lifted his chin and said I had ruined his weekend. The word weekend sounded like a small coin rolling under a fridge. He kept talking. He said he would have appreciated if I had spoken to him first. His mouth said that. His eyes said something with teeth. He kept waiting for me to blink. Would I give him a line to save face? Or would I let the page keep talking without me? He was big on lectures. Mine was one sentence long. I am happy to forward you the letter, I said, because it documents all the dates and times I did speak to you, and you blew me off. I did not raise my voice. I listed the artifacts aloud so he could feel each page land. The December memo promising up to $3.50, my dated asks from February through May, the call notes from stores that were paid in February and early March, and the plan for a retroactive correction to January 1st. When you delayed, I said, you were not trimming fat. You were taking money from my pay line. His jaw flexed. He told me again I had ruined his weekend. I told him he had been stealing time from my raise. I told him it seemed fair that his bonus might shrivel the same way my trust had. I ended the meeting on my terms. There is nothing more to discuss, I said. I am going inside. I wished him a scenic drive back to Muskoka and let the word scenic carry the weight he had tried to put on weekend. When the door closed behind me, my team stared like I had stepped off a roof and landed fine. My phone began to pulse with calls from other stores thanking me and asking what exactly I had sent. I shared the full story because no one had told me to keep quiet, and because sunlight prevents the next soon. I was already planning to leave within 6 to 8 months to start my career, so retaliation worried me less than another quarter of stall. Still, Monday would arrive with consequences for him and a paper trail for HR. Which room would the receipts walk into first, compliance, or a conference call with the president? He could fix one store with a snap and still game the rest, so I made a decision before the adrenaline cooled. Turn one apology into a rule that outlives his bonus math. At lunch I wrote a 2-step off-ramp and a 2-step escalation. Off-ramp. By close of business, he issues a dated rollout schedule for every shop in our area, and he signs a retro worksheet that computes pay from January 1st at the promised rate for each rep, with a column for hours and a column for variance. Escalation. If he stalls again, the packet moves to HR compliance with my 4-page letter, the December memo, and the phone notes naming sister stores already paid. If compliance drags, the president receives a second note marked pattern, not incident. I printed the worksheet template and titled it Retro Calculation, Service Reps. I printed a blank schedule grid and titled it Area Rollout Plan with 7 rows for stores and a signature line under his name. Artifact row grew on my desk. The template, the plan grid, a fresh envelope stamped internal, and a cover note that said please confirm by 5. Before I hit send, I walked to the sales floor and told my team exactly what I was asking for in plain language, so no rumor could paint it as a special favor. Retro to January 1st, new rate going forward, date for every shop, and a signed plan, I said, and the relief in their faces felt like heat leaving a room. When I came back, the cursor blinked like a metronome. I attached the 2 forms and the memo again, CC payroll, so the math would sit where the math lived, and pressed send with the subject confirmation requested, retro and rollout. Outside the glass, spring rain began to tick on the sidewalk. Inside, my red folder sat open like a mouth waiting to speak as the clock hands crept toward 5. Preparation turned out to be math and manners. I called 2 colleagues who had thanked me and asked them to photograph their next stub when payroll posted. I labeled those placeholders precedent and slid them into the red folder. I walked our team through the worksheet line by line so no one would mistake a fix for a favor. This money had always been ours, and paper should say so. I drafted a short message for him to send to all stores, a courteous paragraph that explained the adjustment, named the memo, and promised retro to January 1st with dates for each location. I printed it and titled it Area Notice, Compensation Adjustment. Next, I filled out HR's compliance intake on the internet, but left the final button unclicked. The form generated a timestamp draft with a 10-digit reference I copied onto a sticky labeled hold if needed. Artifact row grew. Placeholders, notice draft, intake reference, and my worksheet. I added one more page to the folder, a phone list of every store with a checkbox column marked confirmed receipt of notice so managers could not bury the email. Then I wrote a one-line courtesy to the union contact whose card lived in my wallet. Information only, no demand, and slid the stamped envelope under the template so I would not reach for it unless he backslid. By mid-afternoon, the rain settled into a steady hiss. Fluorescent light made the paper look clinical in a way I trusted. I set the folder at the front desk, where he could not miss it, and asked our assistant to page me when he arrived to sign. My watch ticked past 4. Keys rattled at the door. A gust of cold air followed him in. I placed a pen on the folder and said one word I had earned. Sign. The room held still. Execution happened on plain letterhead, not in a parking lot. He read the worksheet twice, swallowed, and set his name in a neat loop above a line that already said effective immediately. I wrote the time beside my initials and slid a duplicate into the red folder. He opened the notice draft, kept every sentence but one adjective, and sent it to all stores with payroll on copy and the memo attached. 10 minutes later, payroll replied to all from a shared box that never jokes. Retro to January 1st will be processed on the next cycle. Store lists attached. Please confirm hours by noon Monday. I printed their reply and titled it Payroll Confirmation Retro. I also printed his sent message with the distribution list visible so no one's inbox could claim it vanished. Then I finished the compliance intake I had left in draft, not as a cudgel, but as a record that the fix happened because a promise was written in December and delayed in practice. The form generated a case file where documents can live longer than our tempers. Artifact row grew again. Signed worksheet, sent notice, payroll confirmation, compliance case number. I walked the copies to the break room and told my team what would happen when. Retro line on the next stub. New rate after that. Questions to me or to payroll. No need to think. Just check the math. A colleague asked whether this would hurt his career. I said I did not write the word hurt into any page today. I wrote the word implement. He stood there as if the difference might be warm. The manager cleared his throat and said he would be visiting every shop next week to answer questions. I nodded and taped the payroll reply to the corkboard at eye level. The printer chirped, and a fresh copy slid into my palm, like a receipt the room could hold. Consequences landed with less thunder than a grievance and more power than a speech. Stubs posted with a retro line that finally reflected January. Photos from other stores arrived with quick notes in caps that read thank you, and I stapled one beside the memo, so new hires would know the origin story. A week later, HR circulated a one-page addendum titled Compensation Adjustments, area implementation that welded the rollout date to the December memo and required a compliant sign-off. The footer carried a small line that said union risk mitigated by timely execution, which told me my letter had walked into the right room. He stopped saying soon for a while. Rumor whispered that his quarterly bonus had been recalculated under the same math he had tried on us. I did not chase the rumor because the page in my hand already did the work. Payroll sent a short survey. I circled yes and wrote implement the worksheet on every change. The union contact replied to my courtesy envelope with a postcard that said in script solidarity also means paperwork. I tucked it under the compliance case printout. Artifact row read like a toolkit. Stub photo, HR addendum, compliance case, survey, postcard. I ran a 10-minute huddle and taught the team how to read a retro line and how to keep a pocket notebook for dates. We left the meeting with a laugh that did not feel like defiance so much as relief. When I locked the red folder that night, the clasp clicked with a clean little sound. There was still one page left to write. The next morning, a calendar invite landed from HR for a micro-training called Implementing Compensation Memos. The agenda listed 3 bullets and attached my worksheet template. I printed the invite and taped it beside the payroll email. Later that week, compliance closed the case with a brief note of thanks for proactive documentation and a tiny green word that read resolved. I tucked the closure under the front clip, so it would be the first thing a future me would see. Tomorrow I would write it. I kept the red folder until my last day, then handed a copy of the worksheet and the HR addendum to the new hire with the same advice I wish someone had handed me. Write down dates, ask once in a meeting, ask again in writing, offer a fair off-ramp, and when a promise keeps slipping into later, send the receipts to the room that can fix it. I did not need him fired or embarrassed at cottage. I needed the raise to arrive when promised and the next manager to think twice before treating staff cash as a float for a bonus curve. Revenge, it turned out, was not a scene in a parking lot. It was a set of nouns you can staple to a wall: memo, schedule, worksheet, confirmation, and a habit of moving facts to the right desk. The phone calls from other stores slowed, then stopped, which is what happens when a fix becomes normal. Months later, long after I left for the career I had been aiming at, I ran into a former coworker who grinned and told me their newest change landed on time, with a printed rollout grid taped above the punch clock. He said no one used the word soon anymore, they used the date. That was the whole point. If a leader benefits when a delay fattens a number, write the page so delay shrinks theirs instead. If you are stuck waiting for a promised adjustment now, build your own folder, offer the off-ramp in one sentence, and let the receipts walk into the room that fixes budgets. That is the gentlest way I know to make a bully teach your policy for you, and the cleanest way to leave a place better than you found it. What would you do if a manager kept saying soon while a promised raise slid farther away? Push internally, escalate with the receipts packet, or organize quietly so the policy cannot slip again. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story.